I'm Whitney.
I'm Mindy.
And I'm Deb.
We're three best friends who love nerdy things.
Well, some people think we're nerdy, but we think we're pretty awesome.
This is our nerdiest thing.
This season, we are discussing Jennifer L. Armentrout's From Blood and Ash, all of the books in that series, plus the Flesh and Fire series as well. We are spoiler friendly, so listen at your own risk. Hello, fellow nerds, and welcome to Our Nerdiest Thing. Today we are discussing From Blood and Ash, chapters 8 and 9. Before we get into it, Deb, will you please share about our nerdiest cocktail this week?
This week's cocktail is called Murders, Battles, and Funerals. Oh my!
Oh, gosh.
You can use either rum or bourbon for this, depending on what you like. We're typically rum drinkers here, but we've had some really good bourbon cocktails lately. It also has vanilla vodka, lemon juice, and the Make and Muddle spiced cherry vanilla syrup. So you put that in a mixing glass, swish it all around, strain it over ice, and you put a dash of aromatic bitters in, which I didn't even know we owned until I made this cocktail tonight. It is very, very, very delicious.
Yes, it is.
Mm-hmm. We love that cherry vanilla.
That's my favorite so
Yeah,
far.
it's
So
really
good.
good.
Right. And you can order it online, makeandmuddle.com.
Thank you, Deborah. And thank you, Make and Muddle, as well, because it's really good.
You sound sarcastic, but you're not. And thank you, Make and Muddle.
It's like I have resting bitch face and I have resting bitch voice, too.
Maybe you're just a bitch.
Maybe I am, yeah. Mindy, will you please spin the Wheel of Names?
Yes. Let's see who we have today.
I was about to say, you're making some shit up because your
it's me.
screen's dark. At first, I thought you were looking at a black screen. I was like, you can't just make shit up.
Just pick somebody, yeah. I've got the timer ready.
Okay.
Set and...
Okay, we open up and Poppy and Victor are talking more about Rylan, and then Poppy and Tawny have a cute little sleepover, and it's so adorable. And then she goes to Rylan's funeral, and Hawk is like super hot, and he's like, I'm gonna protect you and don't ever get hurt again. And then she goes to the town hall and the Great Hall, and they're talking, and this people called the Tulises come, and they don't want to give up their child, and they ask, and they say no.
No. They say no.
You will give us your baby.
Hey, at least I got through all the chapters this
You
time.
did, yeah. Good
We
job.
are hungry. You will give us your baby to serve the gods.
Oh, good
Get in
job.
my belly.
I wish that's what they had actually said.
Talk about a movie that did not hold up. Austin Powers.
Austin Powers,
Oh
for
my
sure.
God. That movie.
Yeah.
I tried to watch him again a couple years ago, and I was like, what is happening right now?
As the kids these days say, it's cringy.
Why did we think that shit was okay?
I mean, there was a lot of stuff that we thought was okay.
Yeah. I am not putting that in the show notes because you should not watch that movie.
Mindy, will you please share our nerdiest vocabulary?
I will. I had an interesting one this week. So
Good, because they're normally boring.
Yeah, normally they suck balls.
I think what I meant to say was a very different kind this week. So I didn't have any names or anything to do etymology for, but one thing they say a lot in these chapters is Your Grace. They address the Duke and the Duchess as
yeah.
Your Grace. And I wanted to know where that came from because it just seems kind of odd.
Yeah, it's not
right?
Your Highness or... Yeah.
Right. So I looked it up, and it's either Your Grace or you can say His Grace or Her Grace. In the British Isles, these are styles of address used for dukes, duchesses, and also archbishops. It's used when speaking or writing, and it's an abbreviation for the formal title. Get ready for this. The Most High, Noble, and Potent Prince His Grace.
Oh.
Potent, huh?
So I think His Grace sounds a little more concise.
Is the woman also potent?
Maybe.
She's probably like
She's fertile.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, what else is she good for?
Right.
It is not actually used for a royal duke. So such as Prince Edward, Duke of Kent, they should be addressed as Royal Highness.
So is the Duke in this story not royal?
Apparently not. He must be...
Fuck that guy anyway.
I think he would be considered like the tier below royal, like the
Haha, motherfucker.
Queen Ileana and King Jalara would be the royals, and
Right.
then the dukes and duchesses would be like one step below them, the like a representative of the crown.
And then
Right.
you would have like the lords.
Because
Yeah, I
the
think so.
royals are the ones that are actually related to them, and then these are the ones that have land, I guess, or like they are
Basically,
in charge
yeah.
of an area.
They're
Now I
like
have
the
royals stuck
governor.
in my head. Sing it, Wit.
Which one is?
Royals, but what's her face?
We can never be royals.
Oh, by what's her face? Yeah.
yeah,
Lord.
that girl.
Yeah.
Lord, thank you.
Lord,
I was
thank
like, it's
you.
not a full name.
Oh goodness. I do like that because it is weird that they say Your Grace instead of like
Well,
Your
they say it in
Highness.
Bridgerton, and I thought it pops up so frequently. Where did that come from, and why do they
we
say
do
that?
that?
Yeah.
See, when I hear Grace, I always think of Supernatural, like the angels.
Oh,
Grace,
yeah, yeah.
And Castiel's like, I lost my grace.
Can you just say, in that same voice, can you say, can I have a burger medium well?
Can I have a burger?
Medium well? Come on, I need to know.
I'm not going to be able to do it. Medium well. Anyway, that was my really good Castiel impression.
I mean, thank God you're sitting in a trench coat because I'm so confused.
Oh man, I probably just sound like I'm ill. Well, thank you, Mindy. Thank you, everybody.
and not Castiel, Castiel. That's not confusing at all. So Castiel is the person that's going to be in the book later, and Castiel is an angel of the Lord in Supernatural.
Yes.
And that all came from Your Grace.
Yeah, I took us off the rails and I apologize. So let's get into the chapters. So the beginning of chapter 8, everyone else has left the room. It's just Poppy and Victor, and they're still talking about what happened with Rylan. And Victor says, we should all be on guard. No one is truly safe. And I just thought that was funny because it's like, you're never safe because of the Ascended, right? Like
Right.
you don't realize it because you don't really know what the Ascended truly are, but you are literally never safe. So, I mean, good luck, Hope
it all works out for you, buddy.
I hope it all works out. They never have been safe, right? And something else that I noted is Poppy talking about being willing to deal with whatever consequences come from, like, she has such a strong sense of what is right and what is wrong. And she just does what she thinks is right all the time and knows, sometimes that she's going to get in trouble or that the
Right.
Duke is going to find out and it's going to be really bad for her. But she is willing to face whatever consequences there might be because she believes so strongly that whatever that choice is the right thing to do. And again, I've said this before, she's 18 and she is so mature and, this strong sense of self and this strong sense of morality. Like, I wasn't like that when I was
no.
18.
Do you think it has to do with the God's blood in her? It just makes her a little
that's a
bit
good point.
more mature and makes her because she has
Maybe.
to, when she goes into the calling next year, she has to be able to handle big things.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
true. Maybe.
So I wonder if it
That's a
does
good point.
help her mature some. I was really heartbroken when she's talking to Victor about Rylan because she does ask like when he's going to be laid to rest and what does that look like, and she admits to Victor that she wiped her blade on his clothes and she feels like essentially that she like demeaned his dead body, right? And Victor's like, you kind of had to do what you had to do, but it really stuck with me and I've thought about it ever since I
It
read
stuck
it.
with me too, because remember when we read King of Battle and Blood, and one of my things that I said that I loved about that was when Adrian wipes her blade for her, and
Right.
and that's
so she doesn't have to.
yeah, and so then that struck me with that Poppy had to do that, and she had to wipe it on the person that died in front
That
of her.
she loved, that she
Yeah.
counted as a friend, not as a
Yeah.
guard.
It's not
right?
somebody she killed; it's somebody that died in front of her.
Right.
And
Because
it's
if
hard for
not,
her.
but here's the thing,
Yeah.
she knows if she had, if there was blood dripping down her dress, people would be like, well, where's that blood coming from? Because you're not hurt. And it would expose everybody.
Yeah.
Right. So she was in a really tough situation. And I just really felt for her in that moment.
Yeah. Well, and when they're talking about Ryland's death and she's talking about like basically feeling responsible for it, and Victor starts talking about, well, you know, he would have viewed it the same way that I do. If we die doing our duty, like that's an honorable death. And we know that that is part of what we're signing up for. Right. And she is like, I can't even think about you dying. Like, we're not even going to go there. That's not a possibility.
She even says, you won't die.
I know.
And I'm like, oh, foreshadowing.
Right. Right. But just like we talked about last episode, you know, the previous couple of chapters were we talked about how they were laying the groundwork for the emotional impact that's going to come later when she realizes that everything she believes is false. The same thing is happening here with Victor, right? Yeah. The emotional impact is starting right now with this conversation of his potential death, that he is like, this is what I signed up for. I know that's part of the deal. And she refuses to believe or refuses to accept that is a potential reality, right?
Do you know why she would not let him lay down his life for her if it came down for it? If they were in battle, she wouldn't leave, right?
She'd save him or whatever.
Yeah, she would.
She would rather sacrifice herself for him than let him,
which she does almost to a fault, right? Later in the books, I'm like, okay, you can stop doing that now. Like,
well, my heart breaks for her too in that scene, because Victor does tell her not to waste a moment on guilt when he dies, and in that moment, I just felt for her, because then she's got to think, what he really wants is for me not to feel guilty, even though that's maybe what I feel.
Well, and I wrote down too with that whole conversation, I wonder if he knew that was his future, right? Because in later books, when it talks about victors and their purpose to help somebody for whatever reason, sometimes the victors realize while they're living that they are victors. Like, they figure out what their role is and kind of can see the path before them.
And according to the Ascended, there's no bigger role right now than protecting the maiden.
Well, yeah, true. Yeah. I wonder if Victor, because we've talked a lot, you know, he was the first victor, right? So maybe he is more aware of things than other victors might be or whatever. Yeah. But I just wondered if he, during that conversation, if he had any kind of idea, like, this is absolutely going to happen to me. And soon. Yeah. And he's trying to prepare her. And I wrote down a lot of the same things that you just said, Mindy, about like, it's not going to be your fault. And because he knows that's exactly where she's going to go in her brain, and that's exactly what she does, right? And it's difficult for her. I thought it was interesting too that he says, when they're talking about what they think is the Atlantean attack on Melissa, they talk about a group, like he must have been in a group that was taking a tour of the castle or something. And I wondered if there was actually any group at all. Because Victor says, I didn't know that there was a group. Nobody told me about this. And I wondered, was there actually a group that they're just using to blame this on? Or did they like completely just like brazenly lie to cover their tracks?
I feel like number one, there's no group, but what they're saying is like, well, dissenters got into the group. It's got to be dissenters.
Well, no, I just wondered if that group, like if there was a group touring the castle.
Oh, that's a good point.
Do you know what I'm saying? Right. Like if they made it up completely and there was never any group at all, or because we know they're lying about basically everything.
Well, and it's easy to believe because the day before when Marissa dies, she had come with the group.
Melissa.
Thank you. What did I say, Marissa? Oh, Melissa. When Melissa.
R.I.P.
R.I.P. She was with a lady that was touring the castle. She was her servant, right? Or her maybe lady in waiting, maid, hand, servant, something like that.
This is going to be shocking, but I don't remember.
That is shocking.
Okay, it's been deleted out of the podcast, but Whitney made a mistake earlier. I feel like the world's about to end.
I'm off my game today, guys. So sorry.
So I wrote down, why do we think that Victor is being kept out of the loop? Because I feel like he's being kept out of the loop.
That was
more.
Weird.
And he talks about that. And so I was like, is it that the Duke leaving him out? Or is that Commander Jansen purposely keeping him blind to what's going on?
Jansen, 100%.
I bet it's probably both. Because we know from that extra bonus chapter, the Hawk POV, from the meeting in the Red Pearl right before Poppy goes into his room, Commander Jansen is in on all the plans that Hawk has, right? He knows who Hawk is. He knows what he's doing. He's in on that whole thing.
Right.
So he certainly has a lot of motivation to leave Victor out of information because he's trying to cover for Hawk. Right?
Well, Commander Jansen has an ongoing issue too, that he really is kind of this double agent, right? So he, for those of you that can't remember, later in the series, it's in book 3, Kingdom of Flesh and Fire, right? No, Crown of Gilded Bones. He actually is able to shift forms and takes the form of Beckett and tries to help kill Poppy because he thinks she's the harbinger of death. And so he's manipulating everybody from the get-go.
He's like a triple agent.
He is
because he's pretending to be...
He's Sidney Bristow, y'all.
I mean, he really is. He's pretending to be loyal to Solus, which he isn't, and he's working with Atlanteans to overthrow Solus, but he's also working with what
Alistair?
Alistair, what's
that group though?
Yeah, like the unseen.
The unseen, yeah.
He's really ultimately working with the unseen, who's working against the Atlanteans because they think that they have like special knowledge.
They think Poppy is going to like end the world essentially.
Right. Well, they think they're the only ones that know that.
Right. Right. Like most cult activists.
Right. Well, I think too, though, back to your question about who is keeping Victor out of the loop, I think the Duke has a lot of motivation to keep Victor out of the loop too, because ultimately we are led to understand that Lord Mazine is the one that killed Melissa, and he is BFF with the Duke, right? So if the Duke is covering up for his best friend and partner in crime, basically, he would have a lot of motivation to lie to Victor as well.
Yeah.
So I wonder if it's if everybody's lying to Victor because of his proximity to the maiden, you know?
That's a good point.
So then we get some background with Poppy's mother, Coralina. Basically, Poppy says that Coralina was a favorite of the queen and got special permission to not ascend, even though she was supposed to ascend because she was so in love with her husband, Leopold, that they wanted to like go have a family together. And if she ascended, she couldn't?
She couldn't do that.
So I have a lot of questions around this because
Me too.
We know later in the book that Cora is, or in the books, Cora is not Poppy's mother. Queen Ileana, Isbeth, or Isbitch, as we like to call her, also named the Blood Queen, is actually Poppy's mom. So what was Isbeth's motivation in letting Cora not ascend? Did she think she was going to take care of Poppy? Because we do find out later that essentially Coralina and Leopold were trying to help Poppy escape because they found out the big plot, right?
Coralina was never supposed to ascend because Coralina was a handmaiden.
I was going to say she was not a lady in wait.
She was not. She was a handmaiden and a revenant.
Oh,
and
that's right. Can you explain to the listeners what a revenant is? Because that's a very hard concept.
I mean, I don't think we still know exactly what revenants are, but revenants are like second daughters, second sons that have some kind of special something
from
in their
Colas, right?
I guess in their blood. I don't know if it's from Colas because I think Colas like discovers it maybe, or
I think he figures out how to make them, and he makes because I believe that Callum in the books is Colas's revenant because we meet him at the end of A Light in the Flame.
That's
true.
So
what would be Isbeth's motivation in telling Poppy that she let her mom not ascend?
So, okay. I feel like every episode I'm like, let me tell you a little story.
But this is why you're an excellent host. Yes.
Well, thanks. So Coralina is a handmaiden to Queen Ileana / Isbeth, right?
/ the Blood Queen.
/ the Blood Queen, the Queen of Solus.
I think that's really confusing.
Yeah.
Yes, she's the Queen of Solus, right? And so Coralina is a revenant, which means that she was a second daughter destined to ascend, but she had something extra in her blood, which allowed her to become this thing called a revenant, which essentially means that she can't permanently die unless she drinks the blood of a draken or a draken. That's what.
Are we supposed to think that Coralina might still be alive?
No.
Okay, tell me why.
Hold that thought.
Okay.
So we learn in the end of book 3 and throughout. So book 3, Crown of Gilded Bones, and book 4, The War of Two Queens. We see these revenants get killed in various different ways, and then they reanimate and come back to life after a certain amount of time.
So I'm watching season 7 of Supernatural right now, and they're like the Leviathan.
Yes,
Yeah.
they
Like
are.
they can literally get their heads chopped off and they'll
and
grow
grow
their
them
head back.
again.
Yeah.
Yes. So Coralina was one of those things. Coralina was chosen by Queen Ileana Isbeth, Blood Queen, to pretend to be Poppy's mother. So Queen Ileana was trying to hide the fact that she had this child and like nursed her and raised her as a like infant. And then after a certain period of time was like, people are going to realize that I've had a baby. So I got to give her away.
Because she's supposed to be ascended, and we know
And-
she's not.
Right.
Yes.
Ascended people
cannot
have kids.
Because
Right.
she's a demis,
Yes.
Right.
a demigod.
Which we talked about my tangent last week. From Blood and Ash story time.
This podcast is called Our Nerdiest Thing, so it
Yeah,
kind of works
right?
out.
So Queen Ileana chose Coralina to be Poppy's surrogate mom, basically. Coralina is married to Leopold. They have already had the child, Ian, and they raise Poppy as their own. At some point, Coralina realizes, knows, whatever, the plan that Queen Ileana has for Poppy, which I'm not even going to get into right now. So Coralina and Leopold are like, we cannot let this happen to this girl. So they were trying to run away with her. They get caught, essentially, and taken back to Queen Ileana. Now, from Poppy's perspective, at this point, she believes that her mother, Coralina, who is her adoptive mother, basically, she believes that Coralina was killed by Craven in an attack. We find out in book 4, The War of Two Queens, that Coralina was a revenant. So she couldn't be killed by Craven. She was killed once she was delivered back to Queen Ileana / Isbeth because Isbeth made her drink the blood of a Draken. And that
How did I miss that?
I missed that too.
it is a really quick not very
Because we're
explicit
not Whitney.
line.
How does
Well,
how
she-
do we not spend more time in that book like feeling Poppy's grief again
Yeah.
and like
because it's happened. It's a conversation that I want to say, I can't remember if this conversation happens during that last battle or before the last battle.
oh where Poppy's
But-
like, well, I'm just going to fuck you up, so I'm not really listening to what you're saying.
Whenever that conversation happens, there's a lot of other stuff going on, right? And the way that she says it is not like, I killed Coralina by making her drink, blah, blah, blah. Like, it is not explicit at all. It's something like, well, yeah, she was a revenant, so she would have survived. She did survive the Craven, but she didn't survive my wrath. And then we find out that she made her drink the blood of a Draken, which is one of the only ways that you can kill a revenant.
We might have to have a bonus episode breaking down that battle,
Dude.
and everything that's said, and everything
we
we
might need to
learned.
have bonus episodes breaking down a lot. a lot of things
and,
about this
and here's
book.
the problem about doing a podcast of books that are in a series, because as soon as we were done with A Court of Thorns and Roses, I had to read the next book,
Right.
and now I'm listening to the third book, and then I'm going to
Right.
read Court of
Silver Flames.
Silver Flames. I was going to say Shadow and Flames. So like with this, it's going to be the same thing. I'm going to have to keep going, so
100%,
we'll
yeah.
have to do bonus
Well, that's
episodes.
okay because a new book's coming out.
I know,
and
right?
We're gonna,
In July.
Yeah.
Yeah, happy birthday to me.
So that whole story that I just told, that's the real story of what happened with Coralina. At this point in From Blood and Ash, Poppy does not know any of that. She still believes that her actual biological mother was Coralina, that her actual biological father was Leopold, that they were both killed in this Craven attack. And so the story that Poppy tells us in this chapter is the same story that she got told by Queen Isbeth, that Coralina was supposed to ascend, but she was my favorite. I gave her special permission to not ascend. And because I gave her that permission and she did not fulfill her fate as becoming ascended, that is why she died.
So we're not supposed to think that she couldn't fight off the Craven. We're supposed to think that she got captured.
No, we're at this point we are.
No, I
supposed
mean
to think
overall, like towards the end of book 4.
By the time, once you're all caught up with all the books that are released at this point, she was 100% able to fight against the Craven. She survived the Craven attack, but Ileana Isbeth killed her when they got back to Carcedonia.
How
Because,
old?
go ahead, Min.
I was gonna say, how old was she when the Craven attack happened?
Poppy?
Yes.
6?
I think she's 6.
So, because what confused me about this section is that Poppy talks about how she looks like Leopold. She has his green eyes. And then, the queen tells her that she has her mom's strong brow, oval-shaped face, angular cheekbones, and full mouth. Those aren't her real parents.
I think that you're very susceptible to what people tell you at that age.
That's That's why I asked, because I think she was so young that maybe
but she's like, okay, I guess I
takes
did
that.
Yeah.
Well, I think that there's a couple different things going on. I think that, first of all, Queen Ileana is telling her 1000% the truth, but not actually talking. When she says, you look just like your mother, she's not talking about Coralina. She's talking about herself.
But I mean,
right?
wouldn't Poppy at this point say like, oh, but that looks like you?
Well, Poppy's memories are not 100% accurate, which is a theme that she deals with and tries to remember throughout the first 4 books of the series, right? And at one point, Queen Ileana / Isbeth tells her, basically, like, I glamored Coralina because her actual eye color, I guess it was black. I can't remember what Revenant's eye color is.
Okay.
Her eyes freaked you out. And so we had
That's
to,
right.
we glamored her to look different so that it wouldn't scare you. So I wonder, I don't know if Leopold just happened to have green eyes.
That's what I was going to say. Was it just a coincidence?
Or if it was a glamour, or if it's a
Sometimes-
misremembering. I don't know.
Sometimes I wish when we're talking that we could stop and do a deep dive, because now I want to know about the psychology of suggestive thinking, right? Like, especially with someone that age that has dealt with trauma,
Right.
They're going to believe the people that they trust. So if they say your mom has a strong brow, and so Poppy may now picture her that way, even though that wasn't what she looked like. And I would love to know more. I would love to see a picture of what Coralina looked like, and then what she was glamored to look like, and then what Poppy thinks she looks like.
Right. Well, and that's something that I can't remember if it's book 2 or book 3, but she and Cass and Kieran are having a conversation about her bloodline, right? And they're like, you are absolutely not immortal. And she was like, well, what about my parents? And Kieran, I think, is the one that says, like, your parents may not be the way that you remember them.
Yeah.
Like, you may not be remembering them accurately, right? And then, come to find out that's exactly what's happening. She has inaccurate memories, whether that's because of a glamour or because of suggestion from Queen Ileana, whatever.
Right.
Like, she doesn't remember them as they actually were.
So I know normally we wait until we're done with the chapter to go ahead and hear from our sponsors, but my drink is empty. So can we go ahead and do that?
Yes. Let's
All
take
right,
a break.
We'll be right back.
Craft cocktails don't have to be fussy or ingredient heavy. Make and Muddle is here so that you can have a delicious 3-ingredient cocktail every time. Spend more time reading and less time mixing. Make and Muddle. Cocktail evangelists here to spread the good news about booze.
So basically everything Poppy believes to be true about Coralina is actually false. And I think the saddest part of that for me is her entire motivation to learn how to fight and defend herself is her belief that her parents didn't know how to defend themselves and that's why they died. And that is what really motivates her to train with Victor and to go help the cursed and all these wonderful things that help make her who she is. But it's all based on a lie. Like, that motivation is not actually real because Coralina could fight back.
Did you catch the irony, though, after she talks about that and then she vows to herself a paragraph later? She's like, the dark one will not take me.
I know.
I was like, honey, he's going to take you in more than one way.
I know.
He's going to take you from behind. He's going to take you in the snow.
On a boat in the snow with like green eggs and ham.
I will not fuck on a train. I will not fuck in his brain.
Oh, man. Which, again, that's one of those... The emotional impact of what's going to happen later is starting right now, right? Like, JLA is working, laying that foundation of emotional impact for later.
On top of that irony, I love when Tawny's like, wouldn't it be pretty cool that if in the garden you had stabbed the dark one? And Poppy's like, I would brag about it forever. And then she fucking stabs him in like 400 pages.
I wrote that down too.
Yeah.
I wrote down, LOL, she stabs him in the heart. Or she tries to. Anyway.
But I love that she's like, I would brag about that forever. Like,
I know.
poor thing.
Well, and so then it shifts to Ryland's funeral where she's really not supposed to go, but Poppy goes anyway because she says to Victor, or maybe it's to herself, but she says, I didn't go to my other guard's funeral and I still like feel badly about it.
Right.
Which honestly, that was hard for me because I had, there's a funeral like for a family member that I didn't go to for different reasons, and I really regret it, and I really wish that I had gone, and that was kind of triggering for me. Yeah. Like I understand that feeling of like there's a legitimate reason for why I'm not going, but I wish that I had been there, you know?
But sometimes there's also times that you shouldn't go. So I want to point that out to anyone that
That's
maybe
true.
has had a funeral around a tragedy or something. So for example, for me, my mom passed away. It's been almost 12 years now, but the next year, my sister-in-law's mom passed away, and I went to the funeral, and I had a very difficult time. Yeah. And you know how they try to get everyone to like walk past the casket on the way out?
Yeah.
We were in the back, so we were supposed to go first. And the guy walks, and I'm telling Brian, I'm like, I can't do it. And the funeral home director walks up, and he's like, well, we're next. And I'm like, I can't do it. I need to find another exit. And I'm like starting to like hyperventilate. Yeah. And the guy's like, but you have to. You're in the back. And my husband looks at me and goes, she's not doing it. And I was like, yeah, we're not doing it.
Yay, Brian.
Yeah. So, I mean, I do want to point out that even though you feel bad, sometimes there's good reason not to go.
Well, and it's one of those things that I feel like Poppy probably feels this way too. Like at the time, that was the right decision to make, right? And for Poppy, she didn't go because she was told she wasn't allowed to go, right? And she's trying to follow the rules, and she's trying to have the gods accept her as not acceptable. What's the word that they use? Worthy. Yeah, worthy or unworthy, right? Like she's trying to be worthy in the eyes of the gods. And so for her at that moment, with everything that she had and the information that she had, that was the right decision. It's just later when she looks back, she wished she had done it differently.
Well,
and
to be fair to poor Poppy, Hannes died in his sleep or in a bed, like not
actually
traumatically.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, we find out later he did kind of die traumatically.
Well, I know, but like in her mind, it was just like a simple death where he just
something just happened.
Yes.
Yeah.
And for Rylan, it was right in front of her face, and it was super traumatic. So I mean, if I'm somebody like that, I'm going to do whatever it takes to find closure, and if that's what she needs to find closure, then go for it, girl.
I do love that Victor didn't fight her on it.
Yeah.
Yes,
I mean, I think he was like, well, you're going to go anyway.
I was going to say, I think he knew he couldn't.
point.
Right.
Really.
And so he's like, things are really scary here right now, and I might as well go and protect her.
Right.
Other than her sneaking out and showing up and standing in the shadows.
It was sad, though, when she realized that she felt like a brat, she said, for taking away from, that Victor actually had to be the one to light the pyre, and he had like a role in this, and she has that realization. That was really sad for me.
Like maybe I was distracting him.
Right.
Yeah.
Can we talk about, though, like right before Victor's able to go up to the pyre because Hawk steps up and says,
Yes.
I've got her. And can we talk about just like he hasn't done shit, you guys. He he sucked on her nipple one time and he walks
over her clothes.
Over her clothes. He walks up behind her in the scene and he's like, I've got her. And I listened to the audiobook, and the narrator of this audiobook gives him like this little bit of an accent, and he has this, oh my God, it's so great. And so I'm like, yeah, you got her. You got her.
I wrote, I've got her, says Hawk, and my loins start catching fire.
Like literally, as a reader, you're just like, okay.
Yeah, you do.
Right. Yeah.
Well, I wrote down too, Commander Jansen looks to Victor, right? And then, like you were saying, Mindy, that's when Poppy has her realization of like, oh, Victor knew him the best. He's going to have a like big role in this funeral service, right?
Well, and Victor's kind of his boss too, when it comes down to it.
I wondered if Commander Jansen took Victor away from Poppy on purpose to give Hawk that opportunity to kind of step up.
Oh, that's a good point.
Or if that's just the way that it was going to go, whether Poppy was there or not.
I felt like Hawk was... So I felt like this was a big turning point for Hawk, too.
Oh,
so
yeah.
he had already met Poppy in the Red Pearl. He knew who she was pretty, early in the exchange once he realized
Pretty
it wasn't
quickly.
Britta. And he said he was intrigued by her, but we know from his point of view and from what he says to her in just a couple of pages that he's thoroughly impressed that she showed up.
Yes.
because he knows how hard this is and what she witnessed, and shit, he knows that one of his guys like punched her in the face repeatedly and even says like, well, that's never fucking happening again.
Yep.
And so like I feel like he would have done it no matter what,
Yeah.
because he's
Yeah. No, I think
already
so, too.
so into her that he almost can't stop himself, which like I think that's why it's so hot.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, and this is what I was talking about last episode we were talking about the whistle with Jericho, and, he's trying to kidnap her, but we know from the bonus chapter with Hawk's POV, like, kidnapping her was not part of the plan. Like, so we were talking about that, and I really think that he did not know that had happened until later. I would have to assume that he knew before he sees her here, but it's the next day or a couple of days later. I can't remember.
I think it's the next day, but I think also Kieran, from what I understand from his point of view, was watching, and so I think Hawk would have known.
Kieran was at the meeting. We don't know for sure because we talked last episode, the whistler, somebody whistles when he's like getting into Poppy's face and calls him away. And we all kind of said like, I think that's Kieran. But we don't know that for sure yet. We know that in the extra or the bonus chapter that Kieran does not like Jericho. And he's like, let me just kill him and I'll just do all this myself. Right. But it's an interesting thought to me of like, what if Hawk really did not know what had happened until right that second when he
does
sees her
seem
face,
shocked that, like, it seems that he's caught off guard that she's been hurt.
Yeah, and that's why when I was saying last time, I don't think it's Hawk in the woods that whistles. Like, I don't think that
I don't think it is either.
I don't think he's there. I don't think he saw what happened. I don't know if he's talked to Kieran. I would have to assume that he had. It would be super weird
Right.
if he hadn't
didn't.
at this
Yeah.
point. But
But
maybe
he can
didn't know.
say that Jericho hit her, but Hawk hadn't seen her yet.
Yeah.
Right.
And she
Right.
literally has like a busted lip.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I
Right.
mean, he almost knocked her out. She talked about seeing stars,
Right.
right?
And she's got a big old bruise, I think she said, on
Yes.
her,
Right.
yeah,
So
her temple.
we love morally great characters, right? Like just love morally great characters. And I think it's honestly because in human nature we can really relate
That's
to
how we
that,
are.
right?
Yeah.
And so whenever Victor kind of questions why Hawk would step up, he says, I'm good at what I do. And Victor says, what is that? And he goes, killing. And Poppy pretty much explains that she's like, holy fuck, that was
She's-
hot.
yeah, super turned on,
She's
yeah.
not like, she's like, that shit disturbed me, but now I'm wet.
But
Sorry.
she says it doesn't frighten her, and then she said it actually was quite the opposite. And she
Right.
said,
Yes.
that should have disturbed me, or at the very least concerned me. And it
Right.
didn't.
I know it did not.
I did not remember that she has that turn
Already,
on moment.
yeah.
And I thought that was so hilarious because throughout the whole series, it's a whole runner of Castile being super turned on when she threatens him.
Right.
And tries to stab him or whatever. And I'm like, oh my gosh, they are two peas in a pod. And I totally did not
Meant to
remember
be.
that at all. Yeah.
Well, and then later she says, or he says, she is safe with me, and she says, I was and I wasn't.
Sorry, my wine glass.
Deb's over here trying to make music with her wine glasses.
you were going to make a speech.
My wine glass and my tea glass just hit each other.
That's what she said. That sounds sexual somehow.
What is it on Friends when Joey's like, no matter how you say it, he's like, Grandma's meatloaf.
Yeah, you can make anything
Like,
sound sexual.
Two wine glasses banging.
No, but when he says like you were hurt, and it says that he uttered that in a hard as granite tone, you can be assured that will never happen again. And I wrote double swoon.
Whitney, I'm sure you know this, but when he's talking to her about all this later, he says that he was intrigued with her at the Red Pearl. But when does he like fall for her? Is this the moment? Because
it's when he finds her fighting on the rise.
That's right. That's right. But I mean, he is so sure of himself, though, where he's like, okay, I'm going to kidnap this chick.
Yeah.
But no one's ever going to hurt her again. I mean, at what
Right.
point? I'm so interested in his point of view. Did
I
he like
know,
go
me
home and
too.
he was like, oh fuck?
Shit, whatever.
We
got
know
myself
that
into.
we know that he struggles with his feelings for her for a little bit, because at one point Kieran tells Poppy, I knew that his plans had changed before he knew that his plans had changed, right?
Probably when he fingered her in the forest.
I bet before then, right?
Yeah.
But yeah.
I feel like
just-
Kieran knew immediately.
Oh,
Like
I
at
think
that
so, too.
when he interrupted them at the Red Pearl.
You know what? We talked about Tawny maybe being a little bit of a seer. Maybe Kieran is too.
No, he 100% is because his mom is.
What?
Yeah, I missed that too.
Where did we
Guys.
find that out?
Mind blown.
Guys, in book 3, Crown of Gilded Bones, when Poppy, they go to Kieran's parents' house and
Yeah.
stay there. There's a whole thing about how his parents both, but especially his mom, has a seer.
But that doesn't
in
mean
her.
he is.
There's a seer in her lineage. And she kind of like has feelings about things and like kind of knows things. It's not like she predicts the future, but she can get
She
like
has intuition.
Yes, she has a really good intuition.
Okay, listeners, if you missed that, I need to know because I
missed it too.
I read these books
No.
like 5 times. I
There's
don't.
a few different spots where they talk about like
Well, it makes sense. It
Yeah,
does because
definitely.
Kieran even knows their heartmates before they know.
Yeah.
right,
Right.
Yeah,
But
they
like,
talk about Kieran
do
having
you think
feelings about things.
Kieran knows
That he's a seer?
Yeah.
Probably because if he knows that that's in his family,
Lineage, yeah.
if he knows that's in his family's background,
How do you blow my mind every
I know,
night that
right?
we record?
I'm just that good.
Yeah, you are.
I was talking about how when Kieran knew, I think Kieran knew either when he interrupts them at the Red Pearl and that, whatever conversation afterward with Castile. But I bet after this, because you find out later that Hawk has Jericho's hand cut off.
Yeah.
Because of the way that he handled Poppy in this whole situation. And I feel like that's a pretty clear indicator about how you feel about somebody.
I'm going to ask a question and you're going to be like, well, yeah. But is Kieran also a victor?
Not that we're aware of.
But he could be.
He's
pretty important in protecting
he's extremely
Castile.
important, but he's also Castile's bonded woman.
But he also
so-
protects like Poppy later.
Yes.
So he could be the victor that kind of steps in when Victor dies.
Maybe. I mean, he could be.
Okay, good. I'm glad you weren't like, yeah, we learned about that in
No,
chapter
no, we
6 of book 5.
We don't know anything about Kieran being a victor, but we know that he is bonded to Cass. And I think because he's bonded to Cass and that Poppy is Castile's heartmate, that Kieran is like kind of bonded to her.
Well, they
Do you know what I mean?
They
Eventually
do
they
bond.
really are.
Yeah,
They bond by the lake real good.
But before that, though, right?
Yeah.
Like before that, I think that there's a connection there because he's bonded to Castile.
But I think also he feels the primal notum from her
Yes,
before
yes.
she even knows it's a thing. So he feels close to her even when
Before he knows that it's a
yeah,
thing.
absolutely.
Yeah, that's
God,
true,
these
too.
books are so good.
I know. It's like layer upon layer upon layer. So in chapter 9, we move over. That's where we have Poppy and Victor training, which I love. She talked about loving to read, and I was like, she's like Nesta and the Valkyries. Like she likes to read, right?
Did you
I love
notice the
that.
foreshadowing though that she's like talking about sneaking out and going to the arboretum and
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I'm
Getting,
like-
getting a book.
And also, if she could dress this way every day, all day,
Oh, I
she'd be a
loved
happy
that.
girl.
Love
I'm like,
that.
oh, you're
I
going to get
loved
to.
that.
So, can I say how much I related to Poppy right now? Because Victor says, it's not about winning, Poppy. And she goes, it's not. and for me, I don't want to play a game unless I know I can win.
Yeah.
Right.
It's a character detriment.
No, I totally relate to that though. When she's talking about, I mean, I'm trying to stay alive. Is that not
Yeah.
winning? Like that's kind of the same thing,
Right. If I kick your ass, I won.
Right. Yeah. No, I totally understood where she was coming from there. And so I loved when Victor's like, he says, you're going to have to cool it with your late night, like sneaking out. And she's like, what? He's like, yeah, I absolutely know that you do that. Like, what
love
am
that
I,
too.
stupid? That made me laugh so hard.
I know.
It's like a classic teenager that thinks they're getting away with something.
right.
And the parent is like, no, you
Right,
idiot. Like,
right.
I knew you were doing that. I was just letting you do it.
My sweet daughter, she's 15. She comes to me sometimes and she tells me something, and I'm like, I know.
And
She's like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, I wanted you to tell me.
Yeah.
You know, I knew you would.
yeah.
I love how she's not subtle too when she's kind of pumping him like, who do you think my next guard will be?
Oh, yeah, because he says, Victor, so when she's asking about the garden, Victor goes, you're talking about Hawk. And she goes, oh, is that his name? And he goes, you're a terrible liar. And she says, I am not. And he goes, you didn't know his name. And she said, why would I? And he goes, every woman in the city knows his name. Like, he is like the epitome of hot, and he trains very publicly, right? And he wants to be seen by the Duke and Duchess so he can get promoted to be her guard, and he's done it really well.
Well, and one thing that made me sad about that conversation is that she is thinking through, he's probably trying to get close to me because he wants to go up the ranks
To the Royal Guard.
Yeah.
Like, she's already so jaded that of course everybody's using her.
Yeah.
Right. Like,
Well, they are.
that right. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Like, her experience has made her so cynical and so jaded because that's what she has experienced. Right. Like, that's the only thing that she has to go off of.
Well, and she said something really interesting that I had forgotten about, where she's like, if he makes it to the Royal Guard, he'll retire in the Royal Guard. She's like, those are the only guards that don't die.
Right. He'll live.
And she's so empathetic and passionate that she's like, I get it.
Yeah.
If he's going to use me to get there, it'd be nice if he lived to retirement.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, we find out later a lot of them still don't. Boo-hoo.
Yeah.
Right. So then we go to the Great Hall where they're having like a city council meeting or town hall, whatever it is. And I wrote down, she kind of starts to list the different gods. And I just wrote down, there are several gods that we have met in the Flesh and Fire books.
Can I just say, though, reading this is almost like when you're in the New Testament of the Bible and you're like, Rain, son of blah, 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 son of
Yes,
blah, blah, blah.
the genealogy, yeah.
But because we've had the prequels, I'm like, oh, there's that person
Yeah.
and that person and that person.
Right.
So it makes it, that's why I always think if you're a fantasy book reader, you should reread books.
Oh,
because
yeah.
you're like, oh, now it's making sense.
Yeah, there's just too much that you're 1,000% going to
Okay,
miss.
but okay, maybe I'm just forgetting because we know how my mind works. There was one she mentioned, Paris, the pale white-haired god of the right and prosperity. Do we see him in any other books?
I don't remember.
No,
I don't
think
remember
we know
him at
that.
all. And so then I'm like, ooh, why
That
was he
makes
mentioned?
sense.
Is he going to come up in some of the next books?
He's gonna
That
have
makes
to.
sense because we don't know very much about like the first rite and the first ascension.
Right.
So he's
Right.
got to be a part of that.
That stood
Maybe
out.
he's in Colus's court.
That
Well,
stood out to me.
But also, in the prequels, the gods that are the primals of these different what's the word?
categories.
Categories, I guess. They are completely different from the gods that are the gods in the Blood and Ash books, right? Like, they all get basically overthrown, except for, well, not except for Nyktos. Nyktos is the king of gods in the Blood and Ash world, but in the prequel books, he's the primal of death, right? I did love how it says Nyktos' face, like, he doesn't have features. It just says his face is nothing but silvery moonlight. And how many times have we seen Seraphina be described with moonlight colored hair? She is the silvery moonlight,
So
right?
when
well, and also, sorry, he's a wolf, right? Or
well, we find that out at the very
That's-
Yeah,
end.
but
Yes.
like we're led to believe that. So like I think of Moonlight and wolves. That's
He shifts into he
Yeah.
can
Werewolf.
shift into
yeah.
a wolf.
I feel like Moonlight is connected with wolves in a lot of ways.
Yeah, that's true.
So I know why we don't know Seraphina's name, who is his consort, because he's trying to keep her safe. Why don't we see Nyktos' face?
Yeah, that
Because the way that I understand it, Nyktos is not actually the primal of life and death. Seraphina is,
Why?
because she has the
she's got
power.
both embers.
She has
She
the ember
has-
of life, and he gives her.
Well,
Yeah.
we'll
I
find
guess
out.
to be seen.
Yeah, we'll find out. in
Okay,
book
so that
3.
makes me feel better because I was like, how am
Yeah.
I not getting this?
I
But
think-
why would he not show his face still?
Because anybody that has I would assume anybody that has done anything with the primal of life and death would know that it wasn't Nyktos.
But there's no one living at this point. But I guess those statues were probably built a long time ago.
I don't know. I'm not 100% sure, but I know that it's related to protecting Seraphina
Okay, cool.
because I
gosh, I
think
can't wait for that next
I
book.
think
No,
she's
me
the
either.
she's the actual primal of life and death. So I don't know.
Right. Can
Maybe
you
we'll
do you
find
know
out.
off the top of your head, like, because we've got Cass's point of view coming out in
Yes.
July. And then we have the third book in the prequel series coming out in December.
Yes.
Correct. And then when does Poppy and Castiel's next book come out?
2024.
But we don't know when, right?
I don't think so. But we also have the Miss Willa compendium book that I can't remember what the actual title is.
Which is
I think.
kind of like a behind the scenes type
Yeah,
of thing,
I
right?
wanna
Almost
say-
like John Winchester's journal that
Right.
they printed.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
that's like September, October.
I kind of hope it has some of her journal entries, if you know
It
what
does.
I'm saying.
Oh,
They're,
yeah.
I think they're all. I think it's written like it is her journal. Like all of them are her journal.
Well, we
entries.
know that Poppy learned about threesomes and blowjobs in her journal, so I'm very interested in this.
Yeah.
As Whitney would say,
So they start having this town hall, and basically what's happening is, I guess the townspeople are able to go to the Duke and Duchess Tierman and bring problems,
Complaints?
complaints. I know she talks about somebody's like waxing poetic about how great they are. So I guess it's like you could bring complaints if you dare, but like probably suck up to them.
It reminds
Right.
me of Outlander when they go in front of
The Laird.
to talk about, like they're discussing like this guy owes him a cow or whatever. Like it
Right.
seems like a place to air your grievances. Yeah.
Yeah, like make these
It's
decisions
Judge
for
Judy.
us. Yeah. Poppy feels like she's just on display. She starts talking about feeling really crappy, and later you realize she's starting the culling. She's having headaches. She's talking about her energy shifting crazy. Talking about feeling super restless, but the headaches especially are just killing her. She sees Hawk from across the Great Hall, and they just basically like stare at each other.
I know, which again, so hot. Like
Yes.
he found her in the crowd and she feels him as soon as she walks in.
Yeah.
Yep.
And it's that whole heartmates thing.
I
That's
know.
what it is that you don't know is
Yeah.
coming
and
yet
she
at
talks
this
about
point.
how like she feels like he can see through her veil.
Yes. Like he's making eye contact with me,
Yeah.
even though he shouldn't be able to see my eyes, but like he definitely is.
That's super hot. And then we go into a really hard part of this chapter.
I know. So then we have the Toulis family, and essentially what happens is the Toulis family they've had 3 babies. Their first 2 have passed away from what they call a blood sickness of the blood, like a wasting disease, where they basically like got really sick and there wasn't anything that the healers could do to help, and they passed away. And so later we find out, or come to understand, that sickness of the blood is actually they were being fed on by Ascended, who like couldn't control their urges. Right.
Can we talk about that for a second?
Controlling your urges.
No, about the Ascended feeding on them.
Sure.
So, like Whitney said, we learned that they've already lost 2 sons. They have a third one. They're petitioning the Duke and Duchess, like, for the love of God, please don't take our third child. And they even say that the mom, Mrs. Toulis, can't have any more children. So if their third child is given to the gods for service, which we now know is being eaten by the Ascended, they will have no children left, right? And I mean, my gosh, as a mom, it breaks my heart. And so I started thinking they're blaming it on like a random blood disease, right? That's what the physicians and the Ascended tell them. And so I started really thinking about what diseases have people mistaken for vampirism in the past, right? Because modern medicine, I often wonder, I'm like, what are we gonna in 200 years be like? I cannot believe those people fucking thought that, right? And when I talk about some of this, you're gonna see the correlation. But even with the COVID pandemic, in 200 years, we're gonna be like, well, all they had to do was X.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
And it was so easy. And how come they couldn't figure that out? And it's because there aren't enough clues yet.
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to maybe talk about a few or 5 that 5 diseases that have inspired vampiric folklore. So these are all cited from visiblebody.com and americanoutdoor.guide, which I don't really understand why American Outdoor was doing an article on vampirism and diseases. So if you could write us and let us know, that would be super duper rad. Okay, so the first disease is rabies. That was essentially something that people thought they were vampires in the 17 and 1800s. So the symptoms of rabies are erratic and violent behavior. The transmission of rabies happens between bites or from blood-to-blood contact. Whenever someone dies from rabies, they hemorrhage, so it looks like they were drinking blood. And they also decompose. I did not know this. They decompose more slowly, making it look like they aren't truly dead. Did you all know that?
I did not know
not
that.
know
Right, well, and in this day and age, we have a vaccine, right? So we don't really see this happen. So in the last episode, we had talked about how we believe that the vampires are soulless and therefore maybe don't have a reflection, right? In some vampire lore. So during the 1700s, the rabies epidemic in Europe caused paranoia and hysteria amongst all those people that were infected, right? That's like a big symptom of rabies. So you can have a disorder called, and I'm really going to need the word nerd for this. We can put these words in the show notes because I don't fucking know what they're called. It's esoptrophobia, which causes one to be fearful or unable to withstand looking at themselves in the mirror. So people with rabies would get this mania, essentially, that made them so paranoid that they couldn't look at themselves in the mirror. So people thought they were soulless and they were vampires.
It's fascinating to me that there is a name for that.
I know, right?
Well, apparently it happened often enough that they had to name it, right? Okay, so that was rabies. Number 2, there is a disorder called allumium phobia, which is a fear of garlic, onions, chives, and shallots. So some allumium phobics simply have an aversion to the plants, while others have full-on panic attacks, including shortness of breath, rapid heartbeat, excessive sweating, dry mouth, and nausea. So in the Slavic regions where Romania was, which is where you hear about Dracula, right?
Yeah.
Garlic was known to be an effective ward against evil spirits. And so anyone with an aversion to garlic was a suspected vampire.
A demon or a vampire.
Yeah.
You remember those episodes of like Maury where it's like, I'm terrified of olives or whatever? And they would bring, do you know what I'm talking about?
It was this disorder.
Right, it's that.
It's an actual
and
thing.
they would bring out like a bucket full of olives and the people
freak
would be
out.
like, "Rah!" And they
Which
would scream
at the
and run
time you
away.
think is
Yeah.
funny, but they have
But
like
it's a real thing.
It is
Yeah.
a real thing, right? Which is really sad that like stop doing fucked up shit to people on air. Come on. Okay.
I mean, they went on the show voluntarily.
that is true. They're like, I want you to tell me how you don't like shoes. Okay. So number 3, there's a blood condition that is still around this day, actually. So we know with rabies, there is a vaccine, so we don't really see it out and about, right? But there is a blood condition called porphyria, which can cause extreme sensitivity to sunlight. So the symptoms include skin redness and swelling, blisters on any exposed skin that's exposed to the sun,
Wow.
fragile thin skin, itching, and then the big one is brown or red urine, which made others think that the infected person had drank blood, right?
Oh.
So some physicians even used to recommend drinking animal blood as a treatment for this disease
Oh my
because
gosh.
it's a hemoglobin problem.
Oh.
So flare-ups of this disease can also cause facial disfigurement, which results in receding gum line, which makes it look like you have
have
fangs.
fangs.
Yeah.
Right. So guess what one of the food triggers is for this disease?
Is
I
it
just talked about
garlic?
it. It's garlic. Right. So they've got fangs. They essentially have a flare-up from garlic and they can't go into the sun. And so this is a disease that people still live with, unfortunately.
Oh, wow.
I'm so sorry if you live with that. So number 4, hypodryotic ectodermal dysplasia is a rare genetic...
Gesundheit. Sorry.
Okay. Hypodryotic ectodermal dysplasia is a rare genetic disorder that affects your tooth development. So what happens is that your teeth continue to grow longer than they should. So you grow teeth maybe into your teens instead of like your early childhood. And so what also happens is they grow inwards instead of outwards. So your roots are at the bottom, which makes your teeth appear small and pointy. So people with this disease were commonly thought to be vampires because they did have
They
fangs,
look like they have
right?
pointy teeth, yeah.
Right. So last but not least, we have the disease that was originally called consumption, which we know as
TB?
tuberculosis. So this was the big one. Okay, so in the 1800s, it was believed that people with TB were having the life sucked out of them, which, I mean, God, they were,
Right?
unfortunately.
Yeah.
So untreated tuberculosis can lead to weight loss, weakness, fevers, and coughing up blood. So TB, as we now know, is so contagious and would rapidly spread throughout a family, then it was believed that the people that had died from TB would come back and feed on their family members. Which again, if you don't know, shit, that makes sense,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So I'm sure that everyone listening has heard stories about there was always like the suspected vampire that had been dug up, right? And only to be found less decomposed than they should have been. Everybody's heard like this lore. So this is actually based on a story in the USA, which I did not know. So Mercy Brown, who lived in Rhode Island, which, by the way, was called the vampire capital of America due to the number of TB cases, which is crazy to me because in Louisville, we had a TB sanatorium.
right.
I thought this was the worst place, but Rhode Island was literally called the vampire capital of America due to the number of TB
Yikes.
cases. So Mercy Brown died of this disease, and 2 weeks later, her brother began suffering from similar TB symptoms. She had only been dead for 2 months whenever, and I'm assuming it was some dumbass white old guy, said, we should dig her up. We should exhume her body. She's only been dead for 2 months. Let's just see what she looks like. So they also exhumed the bodies of her mother and sister who had been dead for years, but also had died from TB. So Mercy had been dead for 2 months. Her mother and sister had been dead for years. So of course, when they exhumed her body, the body of Mercy was less decomposed because she hadn't been dead
Yeah,
for
I was
as
gonna
long.
say, yeah.
Compared to people dead for years.
So
Well, yeah.
the townspeople decided that she must be a vampire.
Right. As you would.
Right. So their solution was to remove Mercy's heart,
Oh, gosh.
burn the ashes, and fucking feed it to her brother.
her heart or the ashes?
The ashes of her heart.
Oh, the ashes of her
Right.
heart.
So they burned her heart
Oh.
and fed the ashes to her brother to see if he would get infected with vampirism. Now, don't forget, I had just said he was already showing symptoms of TB.
Why would
Right?
you want to make an experiment to see if somebody...
Also, how
Like,
the
that doesn't
fuck did they
make
get this guy to
sense.
eat this?
I bet they
Right?
forced... I bet
They
I bet
forced
it
him or
was-
they tricked him.
I bet
Yeah.
it was
Right.
gross. Yeah.
So they wanted to see if he was infected, and he did die, but it was because he
Shocker.
already had
Had
TB.
TB.
It was because he ingested ashes of a dead
Of a heart,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So, as you know, they couldn't say like this must be a disease. They thought vampires,
Yeah.
100%. So
That's
it's
crazy.
But again, it's just crazy how there wasn't a lot of modern medicine. They didn't
Right.
know what these diseases were. I didn't know there were so many diseases that are still around that can make you phobic of mirrors and garlic
Right.
and
Yeah,
these
no,
blood
I didn't either.
diseases, and it's really sad because I don't think there's a lot of relief for these people. You know,
Right.
luckily there's
Right.
now a vaccine for TB and rabies, but can you imagine having tuberculosis and someone being like, "Well, you must be a vampire. Let's just fucking kill you."
Yeah.
Right? Let's feed you ashes of your dead
I mean,
sister.
that's crazy.
It blows
Right.
my mind that that's where people go. Like, I get like not understanding, why scientifically this is happening, but like, where does it come from, that jump of?
But it's all hysteria because even
Yeah.
during the pandemic, people are like, well, that vaccine has trackers in it. I'm like,
Yeah.
motherfucker, they're tracking you anyway. If you have a phone or a
Yeah.
computer or any kind of smart television, I don't know what you have to hide, but they know where you are.
I saw a tweet that said something like this, and I was like, 100% I agree with this. Like, right when the vaccines came out for COVID, and it was like, I literally don't even care. Like, put an iPod in me. If I can go get drunk at Olive Garden, I will do it. And I was like, I relate to that.
But same thing. Number one, I don't really have anything to hide.
Right.
Number
Yeah.
two, what are you going to do if you know where I am? Right. And I mean, like, don't get me wrong. There is like the whole Handmaid's Tale being
Big Brother kind of
scared
thing.
of big government
Right.
and all of that.
Yeah.
And I get that. Don't get me wrong. But I think that we also need to believe in science, which
Right.
was the problem with these 5 cases is that people don't believe in science. And they're like, you know what?
Or they don't have enough science to,
Right.
yeah.
They're like, you know what? I'm not going to believe that. I'm going to assume you're a supernatural creature that's feeding on your family.
It's funny because it's like you were kind of saying, Mindy, it's like you're using logic, and I understand the process of logic, but your conclusion is like way off.
But when you're
Yeah, way
scared,
wrong.
if you're scared and you're charismatic, it's very easy to get people to believe in things.
Yeah.
Well, that goes into my deep dive.
I didn't even know that.
I know.
Really?
Oh,
Nice
100,
segue.
100%. So the Toulouse family is basically begging the Duke and Duchess, please make an exception for our child to not be given to the gods. And so basically the Duchess and the Duke are both like, you know that we can't do that. That isn't how this works. This is what the gods have asked us to do. You're risking angering them, so you can have your kid home with you for a few years to live a mortal life and, suffer and maybe get sick and die when they could just fulfill their purpose and be honored and do this really prestigious role of being given over to the gods, right? And so the whole time that I was reading this section and reading the things that the Duke and Duchess say to the Toulouse family, the Duke specifically says he'll be raised in the temples, cared for while in service to the gods. Through us, the gods protect each and every one of you from the horrors outside the rise. All we must do is provide them with service. Are you willing to anger the gods? You will give him to the high priest, and you will be honored to do so. And then the Duchess says, cease the tears. You know this is right and what the gods have requested.
Says the people that can't have kids.
Right. As a non-first time reader, when they're, what's actually happening to these kids, I'm like, these people are so insane and like diabolical. It's crazy. Oh, yeah. And so I kept thinking about Jim Jones. And so I did a deep dive on Jim Jones because
oh my gosh, I can't wait to hear this.
I'm a big true crime person, but I just think that there are a lot of parallels between Jim Jones and his like path to what happened, which we'll talk about
his
with
path of
Jonestown,
enlightenment.
right? And the Ascended and kind of the way that they went about things. So Jim Jones started out as a Pentecostal minister, so super charismatic, lots of supernatural type beliefs, right?
Can I ask a question real quick?
Yes.
Jim Jones is the Kool-Aid guy, right?
I'm gonna get there, but
okay,
yes.
just for listeners, like he's the Kool-Aid guy.
Yes.
That's where you hear like, I'm not going to drink the Kool-Aid.
Right.
It's a cult thing. Mm-hmm. Okay, carry on.
So he starts to go away from mainstream Pentecostal minister and he gets into all these like fringe movements. So he started to go into something called the Latter Rain movement, which was kind of like a political thing in the 50s and 60s where they were integrating congregations. This is still before the civil rights movement. Everywhere was still segregated. So he starts to get involved with this movement about integration, basically. Then there's another movement he starts to get involved with called the Healing Revival, which was a huge Christian movement, I think Pentecostal movement in the 40s and 50s, where it was just like revivals were happening at all these different churches all over the country and they were healing, super charismatic. He founded the People's Temple, his church in Indianapolis in 1955. Then he started to follow Father Divine, who was a part of a fringe movement called the Peace Mission Movement. Father Divine was an African-American spiritual leader, which goes along with what he was doing with this Latter Rain movement, which is all about integrating religious congregations. Father Divine was a spiritual leader who claimed his own divinity. So he was saying that he was divine in and of him. That's why he called himself Father
like
Divine.
Jesus?
Yes.
Okay.
That he was getting special information from God. He was godlike in and of himself.
Such a middle-aged white guy mentality.
Such a narcissist thing.
Well, that's why he called himself Father Divine, right? So what ended up happening is that Jim Jones publicly was basically disavowing Father Divine and saying like he's way wrong, way off base. But privately, he started to mimic the different things that Father Divine was doing, including claiming his own divinity.
Interesting.
So after that, he started getting involved pretty heavily with civil rights activism in the early 1960s. He switched from being Pentecostal to being aligned with Disciples of Christ.
Can I ask what type of activism he was doing?
It was, I think, racial activism. He kind of started aligning himself with different politicians.
So it was a stepping stone for him to get famous. He kind of used that opportunity.
He definitely used that opportunity. Yes.
Okay.
The Disciples of Christ was a different denomination that basically was going to allow him as a pastor to have more autonomy with the way that he ran his church. and the beliefs that he and his church had, which, you know, if you're in a church that belongs or is aligned to a specific denomination, pretty much all of those Christian denominations have like bylaws and rules that you have to say, like, yes, we agree with all those things. That's why we're Southern Baptist or Presbyterian or whatever. And they have governing bodies that basically keep track of what you say you're doing and what you say you believe. And if you fall out of line with what you have agreed to, you can be, you know, sanctioned or kicked out of the convention or whatever,
Can I just
right?
say how Christian like that is?
Right. Yeah. So he switched to this Disciples of Christ because he got to have more autonomy and less supervision, basically. He moved the People's Temple from Indianapolis to San Francisco in 1965. So that's 10 years after the church was founded. He had a very successful church. He had a very devoted following. Pretty much everybody followed him to San Francisco, right? While they were in San Francisco, they did a lot of different types of charity work, and he was aligning himself with different politicians and getting involved with different types of political activism in San Francisco and California.
Did you investigate at this point how much money he was making every year?
I didn't write it down.
He was
it was a lot.
multi-millionaire.
Oh yeah, he was
at this
super
point
wealthy
because you had to pay to get in, and you had to like pay dues to be a part of this, and then he was getting political money at the
Right.
same time.
Right. So he started at this point rejecting traditional Christianity, and he was promoting something called apostolic socialism, which I wasn't clear if he made that up or if it was something that already existed that he just thought sounded good. But basically, he was taking the book of Acts, which talks a lot about the early Christian church and how everybody like shared all their money with each other and took care of each other. And if anybody had any kind of need, like they helped each other.
So a
And
commune.
basically. So he used that book of Acts and was like, here's how we're going to do everything, except it was give all your money to me
Right.
and I'll make sure that everybody gets what they need, right? Which, of course, it totally worked out that way. He started making claims of his own divinity in the late 1960s. As he started making claims of his own divinity, he became more and more controlling over the People's Temple and the people that belonged to it. You were expected to get involved in this communal lifestyle where basically you had to turn over all of your money, like sell your house, sell everything you have, sell your car, sell your possessions, take all the money, give it to him and the church. And he's in charge of controlling where the money goes and how it's distributed among everybody. But he also controlled like every single aspect of community life, like what time you woke up and what you did during the day, how you spent your time. Like he controlled everything.
So you've used the word charismatic a couple of times, and you mean it in terms of like the church and rules, but I'm thinking of charisma in terms of convincing
That too.
thousands and thousands and thousands of people that they should do this.
Well, yes, but also charismatic in terms of the religion, because you have different denominations, right? Like if you go to a Catholic mass, everyone is going to sit when they are told to sit. They are going to stand when they're told to stand. They're going to talk when they're told to talk, and they're going to be quiet when they're told to be quiet, right? Like that's something called high church, where it's very like prescribed and it's very ritualistic, and you follow the directions and you do the steps of the service. And that is not charismatic, right? Like that's just a completely different type of service. Charismatic is very much like you are going to participate in the worship service the way that you feel led to, or the way that you feel is right to you. So if you feel like shouting out at a random time, you do it. If you feel like getting up and dancing in the middle of the room, you do it. Like it doesn't matter what's going on
That
around
comes
you.
from his Pentecostal background,
Exactly.
right? Like you can
Exactly.
get filled with the Holy Spirit, and you can fall to the ground, and you can pray when you want to, and
Right.
it is this very like freeing feeling of like I no longer have to sit when I'm told to, and I can do all these things that I want to do to like praise religion, right? And for the record, we're not knocking any religion by any means. We're just knocking cult leaders.
just cult leaders. So at this point, think about the ascended, right? The ascended are giving themselves divine qualities, right? The gods are using us to communicate with you. We are the spokesperson of the gods, and you need to listen to us. They're using this whole religious belief system to control what people are doing. The gods are going to be mad. You have to do this, that, or whatever. That's the exact same stuff that Jim Jones did. So what happened in the 1970s is, in the early 1970s, his People's Temple started to get a lot of negative press, where people started talking about wanting to leave the church and having a hard time being allowed to leave the commune, and abusive things that were happening, and people were just talking about what was actually going on. So when they started to get that negative press, Jim Jones was like, you know what, guys, we got to go. The American government is oppressing us and making up lies about us and trying to stop our ministry from happening. So he used everybody's money basically to move to Guyana to establish Jonestown, which is what everybody knows the story of Don't Drink the Kool-Aid, right? So what happened was, in 1974, they moved the entire commune to Guyana, into this Jonestown. He convinced or compelled many followers to go with him, which I thought was interesting, because if you have to compel somebody, that means they don't want to do
really
it.
Want to, right?
They don't want to do it. But if they're already a part of the commune, they more than likely have sold every single thing.
I was about to say, they have nowhere to live.
Right.
They've disowned their family.
Yeah.
Right. Depending how long they've been in the commune, if they've been out of the workforce for 5 years, they're kind of fucked.
Life. It's
right.
their entire support system.
Yeah.
It's their life. So what else are they going to do?
Exactly.
Right? So pretty much everybody went. He claimed that he was constructing a socialist paradise free from the oppression of the U.S. government. And I watched, not this week, but a long time ago, I watched a really great documentary about this. And they talked a lot about like how freaking miserable it was. Like, they're in the jungle. All these people from like Indianapolis and San Francisco moved to freaking South American jungle.
Can you imagine us going to the jungle?
I mean, they had no idea. They had no idea what they were doing. And I mean, it was miserable. And so all these families of these that are left behind in America, they have all these family members that went to Guyana, and they're all like, fuck that. And so they all start contacting their government representatives, right? And they're like, this is not okay. Like, we are afraid for their safety. We have no idea what's going on. We think some of our family members have been kidnapped. Like, you need to help us, right? And so basically the families left here made enough noise that one of the U.S. representatives, U.S. Representative Leo Ryan, led a delegation to go to Jonestown and investigate what was going on. And so I remember from the documentary that Jim Jones like freaked the fuck out when they were there and was like, you know, this is the devil, this is the enemy, like they're trying to destroy everything that we're doing here. And a lot of people that were living in Jonestown were like, this sucks. And the jungle sucks, and we have no idea what we're doing. Like, we're in the middle of freaking nowhere. Like, we would like to leave, but they're in the jungle in the middle of nowhere with no money and nowhere to go, right? So how are they supposed to leave? So when this delegation comes, several people that were wanting to leave were like, please take us back with you. Like, please help us. Because what are they going to like travel through the jungle for days to find an airport? After hearing the reports of the human rights violations, this Representative Ryan and his delegation go down there, interview all kinds of people, interview Jim Jones, look and see what's going on. And while they were boarding a returning flight to the U.S., they were with the delegation, the U.S. Representative Leo Ryan, and former temple members who were trying to leave. Ryan and 4 other people in that group were murdered by gunmen from Jonestown. So basically what happened was Jim Jones was like, they're going to take our people, they're going to leave and come back, they're going to bring, he basically told them like they're going to bring like the army of Satan back with them and destroy everything that we've built, and scared them enough that he sent people with guns to murder these people. And then from what I understand, you know, they murder these 5 people, including a government U.S. representative. And I think Jim Jones was kind of like, that was that was probably not a great idea. And so he like really, I want to say he panicked, but I actually don't think he did. And I'll tell you why in a second. So after those murders happened, Jones ordered a mass murder suicide of everybody that lived in Jonestown. And this is where the Kool-Aid thing comes from, which actually was not Kool-Aid. It was like off-brand. Which is not really
That's not
important.
funny.
It's not, but it's just one of those like he didn't even get the real stuff. It was Flavor Aid.
Well, at this point, he was out of money, from what I understand.
Well, yes. So he ordered this mass murder suicide. Almost everybody died by poisoning from this cyanide-laced Flavor Aid. It was a total of 909 people, including 304 children. So
awful.
here's why I think that it was not panic. Because he had enough cyanide already there. And this was a big part of the documentary that I watched forever ago. But it was like, he was slowly stockpiling all this stuff. And it's like, why would you ever order a bunch of freaking cyanide enough to kill
For a
900 people?
fail-safe.
Exactly. And so people are like, this happened and he freaked out and is like, what am I going to do? It's like, no, he knew that this was coming at some point because
Whereas
they had that.
He would have had the same outcome if they had left. Like, he didn't have to kill them. Right. Same
Right.
thing.
The same thing would have happened.
Right. Same
Right.
thing with like the ascended here. You don't have to take the third children. Right.
Right.
Like, you could have really been like, if you're that charismatic, you really could say it's a pleasure to be fed upon. And like, you could do all this shit to make it
Right.
a positive thing, even though it's not. I don't
Right,
think
right.
manipulation and gaslighting is a good thing. But it's crazy how all these people are like, well, you know what the solution is? I should probably kill you.
Right.
Yeah.
It's desperation.
Well, and it's also, I want this to happen on my terms,
Right.
not on anybody. Like, I'm not going to let this delegation leave and leave it up to them with what's going to happen.
Well, and you
I'm
get
gonna
so
control it.
stuck in the idea of the way things should go that you
Right.
can, in this mania of control, that you can no longer be flexible
Yeah.
in what happens. Because he could have easily let those 900 people go.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Right, yeah.
Well, and so...
Uh-huh.
Yeah. I know I've already cussed a little bit in this section, but that's because...
How dare you?
Well, he's just a piece of shit.
That's up to me and Mindy.
So, I mean, he is truly just a piece of shit. So, like, the whole thing was recorded, and he was on like he had like a speaker system where he would get on and like give announcements and like give past sermons and all this kind of stuff. And so he's like on the speaker telling everybody what to do. He had parents feed their children first, and then drink the Kool-Aid themselves. But then this motherfucker didn't even drink Flavor Aid. He shot himself in the head, which is like ultimate like piece of shit. Like you do this horror. I mean, you
That's
can
a slow death.
I was just about to say,
poisoning.
like, you can Google.
He didn't want to suffer.
You can Google cyanide poisoning. Like, it is horrible, horrible, horrible.
How could you? Well, I guess maybe the guilt, but like watching your children do that, how could you be
It
like,
is-
I think I'm going to drink it? I
It
guess
is.
maybe because you felt so horribly.
Well, and that goes back to like the religious brainwashing of it all, because he had convinced them so thoroughly over years at this point that he was God-like, that he was somebody that had special information from God himself. So they trusted him.
and when
what he
they drank
said.
this, they were supposed to transcend, right? It
I-
wasn't a negative thing that they were drinking it.
I don't remember. I don't remember if it was like we're gonna. I think that it was like, we're gonna escape the
Right.
hell on earth that is gonna come to us if we don't do this. But I don't know if it was a specific promise of like, do this and not only will we escape this, but we'll. I guess it was just we'll go to heaven.
I don't actually want to be a fly on the wall on this, but I would like to know, there had to be, out of those 900 people that were like, I'm not doing this. And how did they get convinced to do it? Like, what did he do where people are like, okay. There is a 2-episode Morbid podcast about Jim Jones where you learn really deeply about like his motivation and like
Yeah.
this whole story around like the money, because
Yeah.
the money was a big thing
Yeah.
for him. And I would highly recommend that you listen to it, but it gave me nightmares. I'm not gonna lie.
I mean, that's the thing. It's a tough thing to read about, especially with all the kids and
that was
all
50
children,
years
yeah.
ago. That was not that long ago.
It really wasn't that long ago. But I am just really fascinated by stuff like this because the psychology of it all is what's really interesting to me. And the only other thing that I wanted to say about Jim Jones versus the Ascended is the control of like, this is going to go down the way that I want it to go down, made me think of book 4, War of Two Queens, when Poppy and Kieran and everybody are kind of taking over all these Ascended led towns. And all of these Ascended, in one town in particular, turn at the last minute all of these like servants in the house and turn them into cravens, like 10 minutes before Poppy and them go in. And it's like one of the, Poppy and Kieran are like, what a waste of life. Like, why would you even do that?
Because they could, and it was their vendetta
right
against
like,
them.
We are gonna,
and you're right, it's the control of it.
Well, because they all those Ascended ended up dying anyway, right? So it's like,
it was a fuck you.
Yes, like I know that this is going to be the end result and I'm not going to save myself, but I'm just going to do this because I'm going to go down on my terms and not on yours. It's the exact same thing that happened with Jonestown, right? Like the end, like you said, the end result is not different, but it's, I'm going to do this because I want that control.
So who else is not going to sleep tonight? Me.
Well, here's the thing, though, because I asked myself the same question, but about the Tulises, I was like, they can't be the first ones to go against the grain with this, right? Like, who else is
to ask for an exemption?
Yeah, and so I'm like, why does everything?
And why does everyone seem so shocked when they do it?
Right, like it made me wonder, like, what the psychology of it all is,
right,
and what could lead to that, and. It's basically herd mentality, right? Or sometimes it's called mob mentality. But the definition of herd mentality is the inclination that some humans have to be part of a large group, often neglecting their individual feelings in the process and adopting the behaviors and actions of the people around them, which is kind of a vague, generic way of saying it's a cult. You know what I mean?
You go with the crowd.
Yeah. And so I wanted to look up what motivates that, and I found a very, very eye-opening statistic. Researchers have discovered that it takes a minority of only 5% to influence a population's direction, and the other 95 will follow along, often without even realizing it.
Well, that's horrifying.
Yes,
right?
it is.
Right? Also, in the same article, which I got from psychcentral.com, traits that make us more prone to herd instinct include conflict avoidance. So like you don't want to speak up or go against popular opinion. Risk aversion. You take the so-called safe path. Lack of self-awareness, as in you would rather follow predetermined roles and identities than do the work to build a healthy self-esteem. And also inherent laziness, like you don't want to make difficult decisions to improve your own life.
And then relate to all of those, I'm to be honest.
Well, I mean, I'm definitely someone who is a conflict avoider, so it freaked me out a little bit. But also it says the most common causes of herd mentality are assuming others know more or better than you. So that's kind of an ignorance thing. Like you don't know, so you're going to trust somebody else who
I
you
wouldn't
think
call
knows
it
better.
ignorance, though. Like our human nature is to trust people,
Well, I'm
right?
not
So
saying,
you're
like,
going to
ignorance,
trust
like,
a leader,
right? Well, that's what I'm saying. I'm not like saying it's like you're stupid. I'm just saying you're literally ignorant. You don't know the answers, so
or you at least think you don't,
right?
Yeah.
And you don't want to do the work to get there, so you trust somebody who you think is, more
right. Well, the Duke and the Duchess, they know what's going on.
Yeah.
So if that's
Exactly.
what if
Like,
that's
if
what
they're
they
doing
say,
it-
but so do
Exactly.
the Ascended. There's a lot of people
right.
here that know
Yeah.
what's going on.
No, but I mean, like people that think that they're actually giving their children over to the gods,
Right.
Because like,
But the layer of evil goes beyond the Duke and Duchess.
No, that's
Every
true.
Ascended person knows what's happening.
Yeah,
that's
because they hungry.
exactly.
that's true.
So beyond that, also they follow socially acceptable behaviors because the majority must be correct only because they are the majority. So they're saying, well, all these people think this, so it must be true, right?
Yeah.
Like, and then they also have, this is sort of like a FOMO thing, the fear of being alone, left behind, or missing.
Right.
So all those are sort of motivations. And then I started thinking, where do we see this in, other areas? So in a historical sense, we see it. And Deb, you talked a lot about Hitler's regime early
Right.
on in our first season. The Salem witch trials, same thing. And
That's a
then
big
cults like Jim Jones and the Manson family. That's all historical.
I mean, I would love to say that those things aren't still happening, but they are.
definitely
They just
are,
haven't
yeah.
made history books yet.
Right.
Well, because human nature is still essentially the same, right? Like the way
Well,
our brains work.
And going off of that, it also comes from animal nature. So in a natural sense,
What did you say?
Animal nature.
I thought you said anal. I was like, what is anal nature? Because mine
That
is.
took a
That's
turn.
a bonus episode.
I'm like, I don't know if I'm into that.
No, but like if you look at the natural world, bird migration, schools of fish, that's all
yeah,
herd
that's
mentality. And then beyond that, TV and movies, if you're a Supernatural fan, think about the episode The Scarecrow. It's the same kind of thing.
yeah.
And also The Village by M. Night Shyamalan.
Oh yeah,
Oh,
that's a great
good one,
movie.
too.
And then finally in literature, you've got To Kill a Mockingbird. You've got that
Yes.
whole herd mentality about racism. And one of my favorite stories of all time is The Lottery by Shirley Jackson. Do you all know that story? That's what kind of immediately started me thinking about this when I was reading this book, because it reminded me a lot about that, where you blindly do this thing every year or whenever they say to do it.
Well, in the Hunger Games, a
Yeah.
similar kind of thing.
Yeah.
And Handmaid's Tale, similar kind of deal.
It's fear of, and you know, they even talk about it in these chapters. If you don't follow along, they will kill you.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And we have a survival instinct, and so you will do anything you can to not die.
Yeah.
And I mean, if someone, dissenters, right? There's a reason that they do everything behind the scenes, because they know that they will die if they get caught. So
Yeah.
they're trying to push the movement forward as far as they can without being captured.
Without totally rocking the boat.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, and that's one of the things that Poppy picks up on, right? Like her gift is supposed to just be sensing pain, physical pain and emotional pain. And it's in this meeting where her gift kind of like goes a little haywire for a minute, and she is sensing something else.
Like frustration.
Yes. And she's not, she's never sensed anything that's not pain before. So she's kind of unsure what's really going on, but she is sensing anger, frustration.
And she can tell who it's coming from.
yes, she can pinpoint exactly who it is.
I'm picturing this as 50 to 200 people in this room.
Yeah, me
That
too.
is a lot of people to be able to pinpoint the person that's frustrated. And she does it in a couple more chapters too. She can tell who the dissenter is in the crowd. And
Is that who it was? It was a dissent. Because that's
It is
a
a
question I
dissenter.
had. I was like, who's this blonde mystery man?
it's the same dissenter that throws the head onto the balcony later.
okay.
Right?
It's a hand.
Oh, a
Oh,
hand.
whatever.
Head, body part.
It's a little bit
different. Yeah.
Okay,
It's a little bit different.
I've forgotten about that, and I thought, oh, that's a clue that I missed the
Yeah.
first time.
We'll see him again in a
Okay.
few chapters, that guy. But
I mean, she says it tastes like, because she tastes it, and
Yeah.
she said it was a weird acid tasting, like ugh.
yeah.
Right.
Well, and she doesn't realize her gift is growing because she is going through the culling.
Yeah.
Right.
Like that's
Right.
what happens.
Well, and of
It's
course, the
developing.
Duchess later is like, "You're getting closer to your ascension. The
Yeah.
gods
Right.
are blessing you."
Right.
Yeah.
You like my Duchess voice?
I do.
I think it's very accurate.
It sounds like Paris Hilton.
Well, and one of the last things that Poppy says in this chapter, I don't know how anybody could hear the Toulis family and see them and how upset they are and like not want to help them, but the Ascended are no longer like people.
And it's so funny because I said before we turned on the mics, I forgot that she understands that so early in the
Yeah.
book. And even as the reader, you're not like, but they're from the gods. Why are you thinking that? Like you kind of have like this conflict. And we talk about an unreliable narrator a lot.
Yeah.
At this point, Poppy is a very unreliable narrator because she has no idea what's
Right.
happening in the world, right? But we see her start to say like, okay, my mom was able to not ascend. They let my brother ascend early.
Yeah. There are exceptions.
Right.
Why can't
Why
Exactly.
can't you make an exception for someone that has lost 2 out of 3 of their children?
Right.
And you know that taking their third child is going to ruin their life.
Yeah.
Right.
Why would you do that to someone? And her conclusion is because they're not human
Yeah.
and they don't care.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is true.
Well, and also she's planning on like, well, I'm going to go to the Capitol soon. So maybe when I'm there, I can talk to the Queen and I can maybe persuade her to let, the leadership make exceptions or whatever. And it's like, oh, sweet baby angel.
But we do see the Toulises again, and it's not good.
It's not great. Yeah. But she comes from a good place.
She does. She does. She wants to help. And, there is a lot of anger towards her from the Descended from this specific scene of not helping and saying anything. That's why a lot of them are so upset with her later in the book, is that they're like, well, you let
You
this
were there.
happen.
Yeah.
You have influence and you didn't say anything. You didn't speak up. You didn't talk to the Duke and Duchess. But from her point of view, what was she going to do?
Well, and they weren't going to listen to her.
I was
No, they
gonna say,
weren't.
that
If she
people-
had spoke up to the Duke, he would have beat her.
Yeah.
people think that she had influence because she was a maiden. She had nothing.
she didn't.
Yeah, she had zero power, no
Yeah.
agency. Like, no, she might as well just be like a piece of furniture. Like, she's just there to be looked at. Nobody.
She's
is
the
supposed
blood
to talk-
bag. That's all she
Yeah.
is.
Nobody's
Yeah.
supposed to talk to her. You know, then people just don't understand. People on the outside
Didn't.
don't understand that that's how it is for her.
Right.
So
Really quick, I want to say something that and this is just like calling myself out for being dumb or whatever, like not realizing things. But I realized in here when they describe the Duke and the Duchess is brunette and the Duke is like blonde,
Super
almost
pale.
white.
Did you
Yeah.
always picture them opposite?
Yes,
I did too.
Okay,
Me
good. I'm
too,
not the
yeah.
only one.
But I think it's because Lord Mazine has dark hair.
And exactly,
Maybe.
I think that I look at them as they look the same because in my mind, a smarmy man has a dark mustache.
yeah.
But it's funny because we do think most dark and handsome men in dark romance are hot.
I know.
Right.
Yeah.
So the
But they
Duke,
don't have-
Well,
the
he is
Duke,
supposed to be hot.
right? The Duke could have easily been hot if he hadn't been swarmy.
Right.
Yeah.
Right?
He's supposed to be like super attractive.
Right.
And so
Yeah.
is Mazine. I mean, they all are. All the
Well,
Ascended are
and
supposed to be.
I want to point out again, I think we talked about this last episode because it was our nerdiest thing. Tom Sandoval from
Scandival.
right. He's who we
Vanderpump
picture
Rules.
as Lord Mazine now. And I don't necessarily think he's hot now, but he was hot 5 to 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing. He's very good looking. He's tall, dark, and handsome, right? And so, of
But he's a
course,
jerk.
he's a
He is a
piece of shit.
Right. Yeah. Should we talk about our nerdiest thing of the week?
I have two.
Okay.
Okay. So my first one is I'm kind of embarrassed to say this book talk I came across that had I think they had shared it from Ben Barnes' page, who is the Darkling on Shadow and Bone, and it's him reading passages from Siege and Storm, which is the second book in the Shadow and Bone series that Lee Bardugo wrote. So I sent it to Whitney right away. And literally, I think my panties fell off 5 times.
Well, it's also
I did not know he could talk like that.
it's ASMR. Right?
It is.
So
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
also like he's talking low and whispery like this.
Now you're making my panties fall off. Stop it, Whitney. But he's got that accent. And I'm sure to people that aren't American, you're like, okay. But, it's the same thing as having an American person talk to you if you're British or
I
Australian
think
or whatever.
they think we.
I was
sound
gonna say I don't know if
ridiculous.
that's true.
I don't know. I
don't
think
think the
they like
opposite is
American.
true.
But I think it depends on what part of America you're from. But
We're from Kentucky.
I'm not from here. I just live here.
I am.
But you don't. You
I
probably
sound like this.
You probably you sound the least out of all of us when I listen to us. So, you have a nice little voice.
Thank you.
You can ASMR me anytime. So anyway, that was the first one. I listened to it way too many times. I did not know that man was capable of that. So number 2 is my daughter and I went to the mall today, and I think I've said before on the podcast that we're watching Supernatural together, and she bought us like BFF bitch and jerk rings
love
from
this.
Hot Topic, and like they're on little necklaces, and I'm wearing it right now, and it made my day so
That's really
much.
cute.
I
That's
love
so
that. First
sweet.
of all, she's so into Supernatural, but also she's like, Mom, let's wear necklaces together, because I really thought by 15 she would kind of be past this.
Yeah.
And I know you're not supposed to like want to be around your kids at this age, but she's really cool.
She
Yeah.
is really cool.
She's really cool.
Yeah.
So yeah, that
That's
was my
nice.
nerdiest thing.
Nice. Mindy, what about you?
So I have 2 also. If you listened to our interview with Taylor Ash, she talks about macrame.
Oh yeah.
Well, I got super nerdy and decided that I was going to like research macrame, and I've like saved all these links, and I'm like looking at different patterns. I'm
You're
so
ready.
going to do macrame, but I spent an exorbitant amount of time looking at macrame videos.
That's hilarious.
It's pretty nerdy. But thank you, Taylor Ash, because I think it looks awesome and I'm really excited to try it. And then the other thing is I found out one of my favorite stores is closing. My online store. It's called alwaysfits.com. I love this store. So they're closing, and
Isn't that where you got our Mad Libs?
it is.
Oh.
I know. And I bought some really cool puzzles. They just have funny, like,
Are they still open? 'Cause
right now they are, and everything's 40%
Okay,
off.
because I'll like support them as they're going through this hard
Yeah.
time. I'm sorry, y'all.
So, but what I ordered, because I've always wanted to order it, I ordered a shirt that says "Don't be a douche canoe," and it's got this like rainbows and lamb like jumping. It's hilarious. It's very like vintage, but it's sort of that juxtaposition of, oh, it's so cute, and then it's like, "Don't be a douche canoe." So I bought that, which I have no idea where I'm going to wear that. I can't wear that to work. Like,
You can wear it here.
I'm going to wear it to the podcast. And then, Whitney, you'll like this. I also bought the Big Activity book for anxious people.
Yay!
So me,
What's in that book?
I don't know. We'll have to look through it together.
Something we all need
it's
to do.
activities. Yes. And then I also bought a Mid-Century Retro Designs coloring book, which
Oh,
I'm
cool.
super stoked about.
I love coloring books. I
I
really
do
do.
too. I figure that's something I'll take on a craft weekend. But yeah, I got a little nerdy on there. I was like, oh,
I don't
That's
have cool
awesome.
grown-up coloring books though. I have like my kids that they just
Those
don't
are
use anymore.
so much fun.
They're still
yeah,
fun,
I
yeah.
1000% color.
I
my
definitely
kids'
have a
coloring
Sesame
books.
Street coloring book that my friend Melissa and I went through together, and I still have it.
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
I didn't have like a super nerdy week. It's been a really busy week, and then one of my kids has been sick all weekend. So I nerded out this weekend, sitting on the couch, all weekend long with my sick kiddo, and just said, to hell with my TBR list, and reread The Bonds That Tie. I am about 25% through book 4, and I really started them Friday night, a little bit Friday
But
night.
you know what? They're so good.
They are so good.
They
The world
are.
building is done so well that you don't have to sit there and go, okay, wait, hold on.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
it's just like my comfort read right now this weekend, and I love those books. And my husband told me to keep it in my pants today. So
And tell them what I said.
yeah, Deb said tell him to keep it out of his pants.
I mean, come on.
So
Come on.
yeah, so I'm gonna finish that series probably like tomorrow.
That's awesome.
So that's it.
Yep.
Next episode, we are going to be talking about chapters 10 and 11. More Hawk.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.